1 week season.
Hey, and welcome in OWS fam. So glad that you are with us. We are back in the DFS lab. As always, this is presented by 1 week season. And today we are, as always on Monday, looking at Showdown. Tonight, it is the 5-2 Steelers hosting the 2-5 Giants. Steelers favored by 6. And as always, the purpose of the show is build a lineup on DraftKings. Use that to talk through the upcoming slate. I'm your host, Cheeseman, and as always on Monday, it's my privilege to welcome up Xandamere. Xandamere, how was week 8 for you?
Oh man, week 8 was probably the most frustrating, profitable week I've ever had in DFS. In that, it was a good week. I made money, and when you make money in DFS, you're grateful because it's hard to make money even if you're good at it, right? So you're grateful when it happens. I had like a lineup in like third or fourth in an early only tournament. I had something like 7 or 8 lineups in like the top 50 of the big Yahoo GPP. I had multiple lineups in the top 1% of the big Owners Box GPP. So unfortunately, I had a bunch of lineups right around the top, but nothing really bubbled up and got there. And the reason I say it's frustrating profitable week is when you nail your analysis and your player pool and your lineup construction, like you're not going to do that every single week, right? DFS is hard. You're not going to be right on so many things every single week. And so when you are right, you want to get paid. And so I feel like it was a week where we at OWS were right on a lot of stuff. We had a lot of subscribers do really well, and that's always cool to see.
Yeah.
Our Bigs channel is super busy, tons of subscribers posting big wins, which is great. I saw, just off the top of my head, I saw like a 75K win. I saw a 25K win. I saw a whole bunch of like 4-figure wins. So it's awesome to see our subscribers doing well. I wish I had done that well. I got really, really close and just not quite there. So it's okay, right? Like, again, you're grateful for profitable weeks, but it's frustrating to have been so close to something much bigger and not quite gotten there. DeAndre Swift not being in for the very, very end of the Washington game when they got to the 1-yard line on a DPI call. Caleb Williams attempts a pass, which is incomplete, and then Roschon Johnson gets the ball, gets touched. And I have to think that Swift was kind of banged up on a pass protection play a few plays earlier on that drive, and maybe they were giving him a breather because of that. Maybe he was like, maybe he was in some pain or something. Because I just don't know why you don't have the player who's been your best offensive player that day. I don't know why you don't have him in that critical situation. But so that was a really expensive one. Cedric Tillman getting stat correct with 99 yards, which of course is correct, right? Like at the end of the day, as players, we want the correct scores there. But the fact that he was 99 yards instead of 100 was a huge swing for me. So like there were just a few things that were like these massive swings that could have easily gone the other way, and so be it, right? Like again, it's a profitable week, and I'm grateful. It's been a busy week. NBA started this week, and so we're mostly a football focused site, but I play NBA DFS. I also run our prop service, and NBA is the busiest time of year for us. We make most of our props money comes from NBA. So, it's the busiest time of year for our props package. We got NFL props. We had an awesome weekend of NFL props this weekend.
Yeah.
We had a good start to our first week of NBA, up a few units. So it's just a busy week. And so, I'll get to the swing of it, it's like I'll get the routine down. But right now it's like last week was crazy. But I'll say, if you're out there and you're thinking about props, if you don't know what prop bets are, hop on the OWS website, read our props FAQ on there about what they're about and how our prop service works. NBA is where we make our money on props. And so if you've been thinking about props, if you want to try it out, this is the time to do it because NBA season is where we make our money. And you can try it. We have week passes, we have month passes. You can try it for a week. If it doesn't work for you, if you find that you don't like it, no questions asked. We will give you a refund. We want to make it easy for people to try it if they've never tried it before. And then, if you don't like it, you get your money back. So kind of a no risk deal. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I'll say real fast, and I absolutely love that. But Jam to Win talked a little bit about just kind of like the value of being able to add, depending on your unit size and what you're betting, maybe you're not a someone who can do $100 a bet, but maybe you can do $10 a bet, $20 a bet, or per unit bet. And if you can add 2 to 3K, based, I don't know exactly what the numbers are and like year over year what the profitability of the props package is based on the unit size, but Yeah, I mean, it has definitely been very successful. So if you can add 1 to 2K, if you're even like a $10 unit bet person, that helps you in the long run in other areas, whether
Yeah.
that be DFS or otherwise. And so check out the Angles podcast or the Angles show from this past week. Jam talked about that. But yeah, that's good stuff, Xandamere.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Last year we made about 260 units. And so in the props world, a unit is your standard bet amount. $10, $20, $50, whatever. And it's discussed in units because we could say we made X dollars, but your unit size may be different, right? So we made about 260 units. So multiply that by unit size. You have an idea of how much money you could have made last year, and then subtract the cost of the package. So it was worth a lot of money for people, fortunately, which is a great, great year. And we hope to continue to have success like that. And we can't promise anything in this space, but we've got a multi-year track record of significant success. So I think it's a great market, and it's fun because in the DFS world, right, like we can nail all of our analysis, but there's only one first place in a tournament, right? And not everyone every given week. In the props world, we all win together, which is it's fun. It's a great community. It's exciting to kind of all win together. And I think it's not the same home run as hitting a DFS tournament. Like we had a guy yesterday who turned $3 into 70-something thousand dollars on FanDuel, which is amazing for him. Like that, what a night for that guy. You're not going to do that in props, right? But it's steadily profitable, and it's I think of props more like almost like a side hustle, I guess, right? Where I feel like I know I'm going to make money at the end of the year. Whereas DFS, I hope to, but you don't know for sure. But props, I feel completely confident by the time the NBA season is over that we will make money.
Yeah, and the other thing, and this is the last thing I'll say, then we'll jump into Showdown, and obviously you can respond to this, but you guys don't stay stagnant in your approach. You're constantly evaluating, is this way we're doing it still EV, or is there, has Vegas adjusted and then we adjust as well? I love that about the community, and obviously you're leading that.
Yeah, markets adjust over time, right? Like easy money doesn't remain easy money forever. So you find an edge and you make money with that edge, and then the edge goes away, and then you find the next edge, right? That's sort of
Absolutely. Cool, man. Well, let's jump into Showdown here and kind of get an overview of this. I'll just kind of pull up our typical contest, but obviously you got the Steelers and the Giants tonight. Steelers hosting that one, and I'm excited about talking through this with you because this is one of those games that I think, at least for me personally, has always been a tough one. Like I'll see it and be like, well, maybe I just won't play tonight because this is a low total game, and it's hard for me to envision where the touchdowns are going to come from. But there's obviously an edge to be had because you have to think through, how do you build for a game like this? So what are your initial thoughts on this game? And then as we jump into it, obviously how to build for kind of like, when you look at it, the total, it feels a little bit more of an ugly game.
Yeah. So we had a really fun weekend of football, a lot of scoring. It's fun when touchdowns are scored, right? I think people like offense. And then we wrap up with this game. It's the last game of the week, and it's like, really? I think the total's like 36.5. And that's okay. Right? There's always edge to be found. You just have to figure out where it is. And so there's a couple things to note about low total games, right? In high total games, and I'm not saying just high total in Vegas total. I mean, like when the game's actually played out, high scoring games. In high scoring games, it's more likely that like you can dodge what I call decent scores, and it's more likely that a player who like has one or two catches and a touchdown doesn't find himself in the optimal lineup, right? So like for example, last week the Steelers had a showdown against the Jets, and Van Jefferson got 2 catches on 3 targets for 15 yards and a touchdown, and Van Jefferson was in the optimal lineup with 9.5 DraftKings points. That can still happen based on the way the scoring is distributed. Like Van Jefferson, 9.5 DraftKings points, I think it was like a 2K salary. He could find himself in the optimal in any given showdown. But he's less likely in a much higher scoring game, especially a back and forth higher scoring game, because that means you're generating viable DFS scores from both teams. He's less likely to find himself in the optimal in a higher scoring game because there's other players scoring a lot of points, right? In a low scoring game, it's fewer fantasy points being scored across the board. So it's it's more likely that a scorer like a Van Jefferson is going to end up in the optimal lineup. And that means that we have to be, we have to look around more for like, who's that dude who could catch that one pass for a touchdown? It's more common that one pass for a touchdown play ends up in the winning lineup. And those are, of course, very hard to predict. Right? Like touchdowns are the hardest thing to predict. A broken play for a 50-yard score, something like that from some random guy. Like those are the hardest things to predict. And those are what some people find frustrating about playing Showdown is like this dude just got one target and he happened to catch it and the defender fell down and then he got a 50-yard touchdown and I lost because of that.
Tell me about it.
And it's just the variance inherent in the format. And that will happen in Showdown, right? And like if you play Showdown, you have to accept that's going to happen. And then you have to recognize that over time that you have to be able to build to take advantage of those situations, but also recognize that you're just going to lose some. You're just going to lose games like that. In a low total game, you're more likely to lose that way, right? I think the touchdowns are such an important part of the scoring because there's so few of them that it's hard to win if you don't get them in your lineup. So it's like those random punt plays are like more viable because if they score, they're more likely to be optimal. In a higher scoring game, those kind of punt plays are less likely to be optimal because they can get the touchdown, they can get the 8 or 9 points and still not end up in optimal lineups.
Man.
This one, right? We have one extremely concentrated offense in the Giants. And I won't go into all the data around this, but like the target distribution on that. But the Giants are an extremely concentrated offense. And then one offense that is kind of barbell shaped in that it's very concentrated at the very top end, the Steelers, and then very spread out past that, right? Like George Pickens is a target hog. And then the passing volume is very, very spread out behind him. The dynamic here, of course, is both teams boast very good defenses. The Giants are like an above average defense. The Steelers are an elite defense. Both teams boast somewhat subpar or at least inconsistent offenses where Daniel Jones has looked sometimes fine and sometimes like he has no idea what he's holding in his hand and what he's supposed to do with it. And then Russell Wilson, of course, came off the bench and his first game back and he threw for 264 yards and 2 touchdowns against one of the league's best defenses and ran in score. But he also did while completing 55% of his passes, which is not great. So, it's like, which Russ are we getting? So there's a lot of ways this game could go. The obvious way to build this game is to build for the Steelers to win because they are 6-point home favorites. They are a really good defense. And I think that is absolutely viable. And if it's okay, I want to go through 2 builds. And that means I'm going to do it a little faster. I'm not going to go into quite as much depth, but I want to go through 2 builds and how I would approach this if we want to bet for the Steelers to win versus if we want to bet for a more competitive game or the Giants to upset. So we're going to start with the Steelers win build, and we're going to start with George Pickens in the captain slot.
Alrighty.
And I think now you could also, anytime you're betting on the home team to win in a heavy favorite game, you could also viably bet Najee Harris in the captain spot as the RB1, thinking if they control the game, lots of volume, like that is totally, totally viable, just not the direction going in this build. But this build has a few iterations, which I'll get into in a minute. We're also going to add Russell Wilson because he's the QB, right? We like QBs attached to their pass catcher captains. If George Pickens has a big game, right, he's catching at least 1 touchdown. He's probably going for at least 80 yards, if not 100 yards, right? Those are points for us. So that's the heart of the lineup, and that's the Steelers side. Now we're going to plug in the Giants offense is enormously concentrated around 2 players, and that is Malik Nabers and RB1. So we're going to put in Nabers. Nabers is averaging 12 targets a game, which is absolutely insane. Like, you do not see pass catchers averaging double-digit targets per game. It's very rare, right? His low is 7 in week 1. He had 8 in week 7 against Philly, but they got absolutely dusted, right? They lost 28-3. So you can he still led the team in targets, but Daniel Jones only attempted 21 passes in that game. So even though he only got 8 targets, that's still he got almost a 40% target share.
Yeah,
right?
That's huge.
So his market, he has 60 targets on 240 pass attempts, but he missed 2 games. Right, if you add up, I have to go I didn't calculate his target share with Jones. If you factor out
That's
the
sick.
missing
I mean,
games.
25%, even including the games he missed. That's a crazy. I mean,
Yeah. His
Malik
target share
Nabers
is
has been,
his target share is like 35% or something around there. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that's like an absolutely insane target share. Like he has been the volume hog, and so volume produces points. And the second place where the Giants' offense is concentrated is RB1. The problem is, who is RB1? Because Devin Singletary came back last week. Devin Singletary came back and only played like 20% of the snaps, roughly. And he handled 6 opportunities. And Tyrone Tracy played over 60% of the snaps and handled, I believe it was 9 opportunities, including three targets versus 1 target for Singletary. So the question is, did Singletary lose his job while he was hurt? Because Tracy performed well. It wasn't like Singletary was running well prior to being hurt, right? And Tracy has outplayed him. So the question is, did Singletary lose his job? I'm kind of leaning yes, at least partly. I think that Tracy has played his way into at least a 50-50 timeshare, and probably more than that. And so I could be wrong, right? And if you're playing a bunch of tournaments, it makes sense to take some shots on Singletary because I think Singletary is not going to project very well, and thus he's going to be very, very low owned at 8,400. So especially if you're building a lot of lineups and you're building a lot of lineups with Tracy, it makes sense to take some shots on Singletary, saying, well, maybe he is the RB1. Maybe they were easing him back. Maybe they, gave Tracy all the work because they were getting absolutely blown out, and they didn't want to, overwork Singletary in his first game back in a blowout. So it's possible that this is wrong, right? And this is how we think about accounting for volatility of role in Showdown. But I think it's probably Tracy. I think Tracy is probably at least a 50-50 timeshare guy. And at 4,400, that is just way too cheap, right? He's been a capable pass catcher, which is important as an underdog running back, of course, right? Like in the game, they won the game against Seattle. He ran really well, ran for 129 yards. And then the game against Cincy, when he was the lead back, they lost that game, and he caught 6 targets out of the backfield, right? Like that means he's a capable pass catcher. If he's used in the passing game when they're losing as underdogs, that's good, right? He caught 3 targets last week in the blowout. So I just see him as being at 4,400. I see him as being way too cheap, even if he only has a 50% roll. So, and I think that because he's going to be popular, but I think that because of the uncertainty around his role, I think he won't be as highly owned as he probably should be. Like he might be 40% owned-ish. I'm still fiddling with ownership projections. But he probably, if he's a 50% target or 50% market share running back at 4,400, he should be like 70% owned.
Yes.
So I think it's going to be too low. Okay, next we're going to plug in. This will be fast. We're running out of salary, right? Running out of money. We could do a punt play to get one more strong play in there, but the punt plays, and again, this is where we get to that punt play catches the touchdown. So like if you want to go this direction, and the reason I'm talking about like going multiple directions is there's 2 main ways I want to build for this one. And I'm not just going to build one lineup for each. I'm building like clumps of lineups, right? I'm building a Steelers win construction. I'm building a Giants at least keep it competitive, possibly win construction, which we'll get to. So the Steelers win construction, like you could plug in, you could put in Pat Freiermuth in a kind of lower tier play, like Pat Freiermuth, you have enough salary for Pat Freiermuth and say Van Jefferson. You could put in like a Wan'Dale Robinson. You could even put in like Najee Harris and then a total punt play. All those approaches are viable, right? Like put in Najee Harris, then put in like a Daniel Bellinger or an Eric Gray or a Jalen Hyatt or a Connor Hayward. All those plays are like, those are the punt plays that you're hoping to get the 1 target and a touchdown. In this one, I'm going to do Chris Boswell and Steelers defense, right? Like when a team wins handily, their defense is highly likely to be in the optimal lineup. And, in a 5-1 onslaught, the defense is like 50 or 60% likely to be in the optimal lineup. This isn't a 5-1 onslaught. So the odds of Steelers are less than that. And in a 4-2, like comfortable win, I think it's like, I don't have the data for 4-2, but I think it's like 35-40% likelihood for the defense to be in the optimal.
But great stuff nonetheless. Yeah, I love always thinking through like these optimal percentages versus like the different lineup constructions is just fascinating to me.
And then Boswell is just the like low scoring game, right? You're betting that there's not a ton of touchdowns scored in this one, that Pickens gets at least one. And then they kick several field goals, right? And the defense holds up. So that's kind of like, that's one way to build this. Now, what I will be doing is rotating around. Like there's 3 main Steelers I want to play, which is Pickens, Russ, and Najee. and they're all about the same price. So you can sort of cycle through playing at least 2 of them in your 4-2 Steelers constructions or 5-1 Steelers constructions. Play at least 2 and some with 3. Like I mentioned, how you could do Boswell and Steelers could be Najee and a punt play, or you could like substitute Russ for Najee or Pickens for Najee, right? So you can kind of rotate through those constructions. Nabers and Tracy are like the core Giants that I want to have the most exposure to, but I'll also have a little bit of exposure in the 4-2 construction to like Wan'Dale Robinson, to Darius Slayton, but small amounts, right? Those are much worse, like much more fragile plays than like the Nabers and Tracy. And then let's go to the other way to build. And
so 1 second before you start that, just for the podcast, those listening on the pod, this first lineup we built, Pickens and the captain, and then Russ, Nabers, Tracy, Boswell, Steelers. Okay, go Xandamere. Next one.
Sorry, I'm bouncing too quickly.
Oh, you're good. You're good.
Next one. So a common point of positive leverage in showdown builds, and this has been the case for years, are 4-2 builds where the 4 is the underdog team, right? So that's 4 players from the underdog side. So that's a positive point of leverage in that it's doesn't always hit, right? Like leverage doesn't mean it's going to hit all the time. Leverage means, in this case, the way I'm using the term is it hits at a higher rate than the field plays it, right? So people don't like playing significant underdogs, right? Like people don't like building rosters with 4 players from significant underdogs. They don't project as well, right? Because the underdog team is not going to project as strongly. But that doesn't mean they can't win. They can win games. Like if the Giants probably have a 40% chance to win this game, I'm thinking as a 6-point underdog, and that's off the top of my head. So don't kill me if I'm wrong, but it's around there, right? It's not like they have a 10% chance to win, right? It's not like they lose 90% of the time, right? They win not that far off from half the time if they played this game 100 times. And the field does not tend to think that way. So how do the Giants win? There's 2 ways. One is Malik Nabers goes nuts, right? He gets tons of volume and he performs with it as he has multiple times this season. The other way is the Giants defense holds up. The Giants defense has been pretty darn good. And one thing they're really good at is getting after the quarterback. The Giants defense leads the league in sacks per game, with 4.7 sacks per game, which is an insane number. And so if the Giants defense is able to get to Russ and control, and they could stop drives, right? Like they can stop drives so easily like that. A sack is the math around how 1 sack kills a drive is like really impressive. 1 sack like turns a drive from, it is enormous. I'm just making up numbers now because I don't remember them. I wish I thought of this part and gone and looked it up before we popped on the show. But surprise, it's early in the morning and I was unprepared for this bit.
Yeah.
But
it's 6 a.m. for you. Yeah.
The math around a sack resulting in a drive stalling is enormous. And so the idea is here, if the Giants defense holds up, which is highly plausible, then we can very easily see them control and win this game. And so if we're going to do a 4-2 construction, there's 2, like I said, there's 2 ways to do it. There's 2 guys I would captain in 4-2 constructions. And those are the same guys I mentioned before, which is RB1. And so I'd mostly have Tracy there, but also a little Singletary, and then Nabers. And so if we go that direction, sorry, 1 second just to test something and make sure I know what I'm talking about before I start building lineups on the stream. Yeah, I thought that was a little bit short of salary. Shoot. What I want to do, I'm a little bit short on salary for, unfortunately. So what we're going to start with here is we're going to go with Tyrone Tracy at captain instead of Nabers. Now I'll build some Nabers ones, but we're going to go with Tracy.
Got it. All right, Tracy in there.
And again, and then we're thinking here that, the Giants control the game. They get a lot of run on the ground. We're right about Tracy being the running back. And then the next play we're going to put in is Giants defense. Because again, when you're trying to win as a 6-point road underdog, again, there's 2 paths I see. One is, the home favorite scores, you just score more, or the other is the home favorite doesn't score and you control the game. And so you can build for both those forks, right? But in this lineup is being built around the home team doesn't really score, right? The road team is able to control the game. Now we have a delicious amount of salary left, right? Over 10,000 per player. So we know we're going to leave some salary on the table on this build. And so that also is a way that gives us differentiation. So we're going to put in Daniel Jones and Malik Nabers.
Okay. All right.
So the build here now is hypothesizing that we do get points from the Giants passing game. Nabers' market share of targets is so crazy that even though, we're hypothesizing that Tracy has a really big game, we're hypothesizing that Nabers still does enough, right? Because he's the chain mover. He's the guy in the passing game. And it's really hard for me not to play Nabers given his volume. And then now we still have 10,300 left. And so we're going to plug in George Pickens and Russell Wilson.
Love it.
And so we have, and so here what we have now, again, like this is a lineup that I think you won't see a lot of. You won't see a lot of builds around this. And the reason why, one, you have Russell Wilson against the Giants defense, which is a negative correlation. But what you're betting on is not that the Steelers get shut out. You're betting that that Russ gets sacked a bunch, but you're also thinking that, okay, now the Giants are playing from ahead late in the game. That turns the Steelers super pass heavy. That means that George Pickens is probably getting bombed at targets. You could do other forks in this construction. You could do Russell Wilson and Najee Harris. You could do a 5-1 construction that includes Wan'Dale Robinson instead of Russ, for example. So again, like I think of Showdown builds as like clumps of lineups, not necessarily as one lineup. And I think that, for people who are doing multiple entries in Showdown, I kind of wanted to spend some time talking about that sort of approach, more of a portfolio of lineups approach, as opposed to just a like build one lineup, which is fun. It's a fun exercise. But I think if you're playing multiple lineups, it's useful to think about like, how do you think about that? And so for me, I'm probably going to split my exposure roughly 50-50 between Steelers win constructions, which are all going to be 4-2 or 5-1 Steelers, and then 4-2 Giants lineups. And that's one of the ways that I think about how to approach a Showdown, because you have to, recognize that even in Showdown, when it's only one game and the player pool is limited, you still can't cover all the bases, right? And so you've got to think about where you want to kind of make your stands. And you're not going to be right every time, but you've got to think about like where you want to place your bets. And those are the two spots I want to place my bets on, right? One, basically a bet that, 50-50 odds for me, roughly, that either offense kind of flounders, right? I don't really want to bet on a shootout scenario in this game. And also because the field generally, most builds are built for over games without people thinking about it. That's just how people work when they build rosters, is most rosters end up being built for overs. And so I don't want to build for an over game here. My approach to low total games is generally not to build for shootouts, because like most people build for that without thinking about realizing that's what they're doing. And so like that format tends to be over owned. And then if you want, you could build for the sort of really super under low scoring gross game. And those lineups often have like between 2 and 4 like defenses and kickers, usually don't have quarterbacks, because without a lot of touchdowns scored, it's hard for quarterbacks to get in the optimal lineup. Usually have volume guys like, say, Nabers, running backs. But those kind of games are, for me, hard to predict. Obviously this game is more likely that we have that kind of outcome because it's a very low total game. But they're hard to predict, and they're also hard to win, where when you have let's say this game scores 20 points and ends 14-6, right? Or something like that. It's those games to me are really hard to win, because like in that case, like you need the touchdown, right? You need every bit of scoring in your lineup. And so it's like, you have to be so perfect that it's really hard for me to figure out where that comes from. And I feel like that's a more random outcome. I'd rather bet on outcomes where if the game plays out the way I'm hoping, I feel like I have a higher chance of identifying the correct plays.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Great stuff. I love how you broke that down, just kind of like the two buckets, the 50-50 building for these different outcomes. And yeah, it makes sense too. I mean, if you're building for the completely gross game, like you said, you basically have to guess who scores the random touchdown, which, as we all know, it can be, it could be an offensive lineman for all we know, which obviously can't really put that into a showdown. But yeah, man. But great stuff, Xandamere. So the final lineup we landed on, this second build, was this Giants-led lineup. 4 Giants, Tracy and the captain, and Giants defense, Malik Nabers and Daniel Jones, and then George Pickens and Russell Wilson. And like you said, like this is a clump of lineups for you. You could fork this multiple ways, especially if you're doing multi-entry. That's definitely the way to go, is not just building this one lineup. Obviously, if you're single entry, you kind of have to accept a little more variance there, or if you're like 3 max or something like that. But if you're building for 20 maxes or 150 or something, you can really have these couple of scenarios you're targeting, but then branch off in multiple ways in those scenarios.
Yeah, exactly. And that's how I think about playing Showdown. Like, we build one lineup on the show generally. Personally, I think it'd be really hard to play Showdown building one lineup per slate. And I'm not saying you can't do it. Like, there's people who do it, right? But for me, I feel the edge is in building around scenarios and building multiple iterations of that around scenarios. Because in Showdown, you have to be closer to perfect than you do on main slate because there's a smaller player pool, right? Like, the optimal lineup wins something like 60 to 70% of the time. And so if you don't have the optimal, if you don't find the exact optimal lineup, you're not going to win, right? In main slate, the optimal lineup never wins, right? There's always, I'm not sure the optimal lineup has ever won that I can recall. And
the
like
perfect lineup.
So there's more flexibility to not be perfect and still win. So like, I think that lends itself to multi-entry in Showdown. That's my personal approach. Now, I think you can still, there are people who make money playing like high dollar limited entry in Showdown, like playing like 50, 100-man tournaments. I think that's totally viable. There's people who do that. But if you're playing like the 100K entry or 50K entry GPPs, like, I think that's really hard to do successfully with one lineup a slate. But so I like thinking about how we go kind of the portfolio based approach and how you build like a clump of lineups based around like, I've identified this one scenario and here's how it's likeliest to play out. And here's the pool of guys likeliest to benefit. And now how do I mix and match them together?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Xandamere, great stuff as always, guys. A couple of lineups built today, and just I feel like this was just a really helpful way to talk through just kind of how you approach a game like this. So, Xandamere, good luck tonight, man. Are you going to be playing tonight?
That's a good question. I'm not totally sure because I have a crazy busy day. Like, I'm teaching today, and
life stuff.
I have an MBA, and so like I may or may not.
It takes time.
I'm hoping to. So here's the thing, though. There's no real questionable tags in this game, right? So there's nothing I have to worry about from an injury standpoint. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to get some builds done this morning and enter. But we'll see. I hope to.
See. Awesome, man. Well, great stuff as always. Guys, obviously join us throughout the week on DFS Lab, and good luck tonight in Showdown. Hopefully you guys hit something big. We'll catch you next time. Thanks, Xandamere.
See ya.